this is the Sony A7IV. It has a lot of buttons on it, and a lot of those are customizable, which is one of the great things about these cameras. So I'm going to go through how I have all the custom buttons set to make particularly filming, but also taking photos a lot easier. So the first thing you can see when you open up the menu and you go down to the custom key / dial set is there are two different settings. There's one for photo and one for video, which is great because you might need very different things, and there's stuff that you'll need in video mode that you won't need in photo, and vice versa. So it's good that they're completely separated. And we'll go into the photo ones first just because that's on top. And then from here we can see it's separated by basically the face of the camera. We have the rear, the top, and then the lens, and then you have the dials. On the rear face of the camera, starting from number 1, which is the auto exposure lock button, which in photo mode I have set to turn on tracking. So whatever I'm focused on, I hold that button and it'll track the motion of that, whether I'm moving the camera around or whether the subject is moving. The next one is the autofocus on button. I have that set to eye autofocus. Now this is really nice. So anytime that there is a face in the frame, if I hold that button, it'll automatically lock onto the eye of that face. I don't need the focus spot to be on the face, like how the regular eye autofocus works. The face needs to sort of be in or around the actual focus area. Probably why you would shoot wide focus area for video mode, which is what I do. But on photo mode, I actually use the flexible spot small. So for it to actually focus on an eye, the focus spot needs to be at least on the face. But if that's not the case, I can just hold this button and it'll lock onto any eye that it can see in the entire frame. So that's pretty helpful for that. Then we have our C1 button right here next to the viewfinder. And I have that set to switch between full frame and Super 35 crop mode. Now that's not really that helpful in photo mode because if you do switch to Super 35 mode, you are going down to 14 megapixels as opposed to the 33 in full frame. So most of the time in photo mode, I'm not really going to use that, but I mainly have it there for consistency between my video and photo modes because I do have that button there for video because it's very useful in video because you don't actually lose any actual resolution switching into Super 35 mode. Then our next one, we have a custom button way up on the side here, and I have that set to switch silent modes. Basically, if I need to turn on silent mode for whatever reason, maybe if I don't want the person I'm standing next to know I'm taking photos, it'll just switch to electronic shutter. That's pretty much all the silent mode does with my setup because I have all the other sounds turned off. Like I don't like the beeps and stuff like that by default are on. So I turned that off all the time anyway. That never happens. But it basically changes it from mechanical shutter to electronic shutter. So this is what the mechanical shutter sounds like. And then if I turn on silent mode, I just took 4 photos and you didn't hear it. I can't see myself using that a whole lot, but it is good to just quickly be able to turn on silent mode if for some reason I want to switch to electronic shutter. And then the final one in this set is the rubbish bin button down the very bottom, which is that C4, and that is just to switch between the viewfinder and the monitor. I don't like having it automatic, because then if maybe I just want to press a button and if I'm reaching across, it'll like turn off the monitor. I don't want to do that, so I just have it set as a button, so if I ever do want to look through the viewfinder, which isn't actually that often, but if I do, I can just press that, and then it sort of turns on the sensor. It turns off the monitor, and then when I bring the camera up to my eye, it'll turn on the viewfinder. Okay, so that's the first set of buttons, and now if we go to the second set, this is more of the face buttons right here. So this is more focused on this area. Now, the first one there is the joystick, so you can obviously use the joystick in your directions, but then you can also just click it in and have that set to do something. So I have it set to focus standard in photo mode, which basically just resets the focus point. So as you can see here, I can use the joystick to move the focus point around. Let's go, it's up, okay, now it's down in the corner, and then I click that button and it resets to the middle. So that's useful for setting it perfectly in the middle, because one thing that I didn't like about moving around the focus spot on my G85 is that I would have to do it by touchscreen, and it's hard to get it perfectly in the middle unless you have like the grid lines and stuff, and even then it can be hard. But this is just one click, and it's reset perfectly in the middle. All right, next we have the center button of the D-pad, and that's just to turn on or off my grid line display. So I click that if I want grid lines on, I click it again if I want to take them off. Pretty straightforward. I guess it's just easy access to use those grid lines because maybe I don't always want them. So it's good to just have them easily accessible to turn them on or off. So the left and right buttons on the D-pad I've actually left at their default because they actually have little markings next to them that sort of designate what they are by default. Now you can change these, but left is drive mode, and in photo, that's good to be able to do. So if I want to set a timer or if I want to change to burst shooting, it's easy. Press one button and then I can select it from there. And then right is ISO. Now I don't really use this function much where I click right and then I can scroll up or down through the ISOs because I actually have ISO set to one of the dials, which I'll get to in a minute. And then down on the D-pad I have as focus magnifier. So very helpful if I'm shooting manual focus. It'll just zoom in on whatever I'm trying to focus on. And it's way easier to get perfect manual focus when you have that magnifier. Then when we go to the top right here, we have the record button and the C2 button. In photo mode, I have the record button set to the media settings page. So that'll bring up information about the cards that are in there at the moment and which card it's writing to, whether it's writing to both, stuff like that. Again, don't use that much, but couldn't really think of much else to put there. And now I could have just left it on the default, which was record, but I feel like if I ever want to just record something, it's easy enough to switch to video mode and then click record. And then I have the C2 button right here set to focus area. So that'll change between the small flexible spot that I have by default, and I can change that to, you know, maybe a larger spot or wide or any of the other focus areas, basically. Most of the time I just leave it on flexible spot because that's easy enough and it's good enough to be pretty precise, but that's there if I ever do want to change the focus area. And then moving on to the lens button right here. So this Sony lens, a lot of lenses for Sony E-mount these days have custom buttons, both native Sony and other ones, like even other brands have custom buttons now. By default, it's set to focus hold, which just means you press it, it'll lock focus on wherever you were focused at the time. I changed it to set face/eye priority, so I can turn eye autofocus on or off, basically, with the press of a button. So that's all the buttons. We go down to the last page here, we can see the settings for the dials. Now, in photo mode, I actually haven't changed anything. We have aperture on the front, shutter speed on the back. This third one, which is lockable, is set to exposure compensation by default. Haven't changed it. Because I now shoot manual the vast majority of the time, I actually don't really use this. But if I was shooting shutter priority or aperture priority, then I would use it for exposure compensation if I wanted to change exposure, basically. I couldn't really find any other things there that would really be that helpful. Like maybe you could set it for white balance or something like that, but I never change my white balance anyway. I just set it to 5600 Kelvin and that's it for all of my modes. I don't know. And then the last one is the dial on the back here on the D-pad. You can actually rotate that. And as you can see, I'm actually scrolling through the menu by rotating it. That is to change ISO. Now that's really nice, and then I'd never have to press a button and then start turning a dial to change ISO. It's easy just to start rotating the wheel and you can change it. Now the auto ISO is pretty good on this, and you can use it in manual mode, so I do actually use auto ISO a fair bit. However, it is super easy to change with just rotating the dial around to get the right exposure. Okay, so that's all my custom buttons for photo. Going into the video settings now. It's the exact same settings, it's just you can go in and change all the exact same buttons to whatever you want. Now you do have slightly different options in photo mode and video mode, obviously, because there are differences. So starting with number one, again, on the back, the auto exposure lock button on the top right, this one right here. I have that set to zebra display, or zebra, if you will. Now I haven't really used zebras much, but it is a good function to use when you're shooting video to check for overexposure. So I have my zebras set basically at the peaking point for S-Cinetone, which is what I shoot in at the moment. So I just have that set to 100 plus. So if anything is peaked, if it is just full white, then it'll show where that is on the display. So I can see, okay, is that maybe just a bright light, and it's fine if it's overexposed, or if it's like showing on the skin, then I'm like, oh, okay, I definitely need to stop down a bit. Okay, the next one, which is the AF on button. In photo mode, I had it set to eye autofocus. In video mode, I have it set to zoom, and I have my zoom settings set to clear image zoom. And if you don't know, clear image zoom is basically, it's a feature of these Sony cameras that do some oversampling. So you can zoom in on the sensor and actually not lose any actual pixels. You are going to technically lose a little bit of quality because you're no longer downsampling, but it is good to just be able to go in that 1.5 times if you need to zoom in a bit, especially if you only have a prime lens like I do. Okay, C1 I have set the same. I have that set to Super 35 crop mode. Now this is great to use in video mode, especially, again, prime lens. So I can still be in 4K, but I can turn this 20mm basically into a 30mm if I just shoot on less of the sensor. And the good thing about using the APS-C crop mode instead of clear image zoom is you can still see all your focus stuff. Like, the autofocus still works perfectly. You still have the box tracking on your eye, which is a setting to turn on. So, like, if you do have one of these cameras and you don't have that setting turned on, turn that setting on. But I have noticed if I clear image zoom, then I lose the box around my eye. Generally, I prefer to do the APS-C crop mode. And then if I need to zoom in more, then I would clear image zoom. Or if I was recording and I didn't want to stop recording, but I still wanted to zoom in, then I would maybe do clear image zoom, because you can't switch between full frame and APS-C mode while you're recording. So you would have to stop recording and change it and start again. Not that that's ever really happened yet, so we'll see if it does. Okay, then I have my C3 button up the top left corner. I only recently changed this to record. So, well, movie shooting, as they call it. So I have a second record button on top of my shutter button, because there is a setting in there that you should change in video mode on any of these cameras, even on something like the FX3, which is a cinema camera. But if you put it into video mode and then you press the shutter button, it says that you can't take photos in this mode. So it doesn't, even a video-centric camera doesn't have this setting enabled by default. It's just a setting called record with shutter. It just means that you can use the shutter button to start your recording. But the reason that I added this second record button, and on the opposite side of the camera, because it's like, shutter button's here, this button's back here, is I was thinking about it, and once I've got my full cage set up, when I have a cage and handles and stuff on, it actually might make a lot more sense to use this record button to start recording a lot of the time, especially if I'm holding it maybe with my right hand by the top handle. It'll be easier to just use my left hand to press that button than to reach all the way around and press it here. So I just thought that would be a good idea. And my cage and everything's actually getting delivered today. So if you didn't watch that live stream of me setting it up, go watch that. I'll make videos on it as well. Okay, and then down to the C4 button at the very bottom, I have that set to monitor brightness. Because I never really use the viewfinder in video mode, I feel like I don't really need to have a quick button to switch between them. So I have it set to monitor brightness. So if it is super bright outside and I actually just can't see my monitor, it's not bright enough, click that button. Just an easy way to switch between the regular standard brightness and brighter. All right, and then we go to the next page, which is, again, all these face buttons right here. Now, I actually have them all to just follow the photo mode. So all of the photo settings for these buttons, exactly the same. I haven't even set them individually. I just left them as follow custom photo. However, with the joystick clicking in button, because in video mode I use a wide focus area, what it basically does is it makes a smaller focus area in the middle, and it actually focuses with that. If I'm in video mode and I want to focus on something that is just in the middle of the frame, I can just press that and it'll focus on whatever's in the middle of the frame. So that's actually quite helpful. And of course we have grid lines, we have our drive mode and our ISO. Now drive mode, I don't really think I'm going to need to be pressing much in video mode, but couldn't think of anything else to put there. ISO, again, just by default. Yeah, I don't really use it. And then the focus magnifier for if I'm doing manual focus. Now on the top, these buttons here, like I said, I've changed this is no longer a record button. I have a record button over here. I have the record button set to file format. So that is changing between the XAVC S4K or HD or All Intra or H.265, whichever format I want to shoot in. To be fair, I don't really change it, like, ever. For example, if I want to go down to, like, 1080p, I can just change to my custom 3 mode. I don't really need to do that, but, it's there if I do need to just quickly change. Same thing for the next one. This C2 button I have set to frame rate, so I can just change between, if I'm in 4K, I can just change between 25 and 50 frames per second. If I'm in full HD, I can change between 25, 50, and 100 frames per second. Again, my custom modes for 1, 2, and 3 are 4K 25, 4K 50, and then 1080p 100. So if I'm ever going to shoot in any of those frame rates, I'm probably just going to switch to that mode because it's already got the shutter speed set. It has all the other settings set for that frame rate. Going down to the focus hold button on the lens, again, have that set to follow the other one, so it's just the same. Turning on or off eye autofocus priority. Most of the time I'll leave it on because a lot of the time I'm videoing myself, but if maybe there was faces in the frame that I didn't want to focus on, I could turn that off. And then when it comes to my dials, now 3 of them are the same: aperture, shutter speed, ISO. The one thing actually with the aperture one is I never actually use it because this lens has an aperture ring that I can use on there, so I actually have it set. I most of the time leave it in 1.8, so those 3 dials are exactly the same as photo. And then this lockable dial, now this is actually quite nice. It makes it very easy to change audio levels. I have it set to audio level, and it's great that it's lockable because I don't really change audio levels that much. So I just have it, at the moment I think I have it set to about 15, which is what I found pretty good for my video mic Go 2, which I actually have on this camera right now. But if I'm maybe using another mic and I notice it's either too quiet or too loud, I can unclick that, I can start turning a little bit, and we're good. And then I can lock it back down and it'll just stay there. I do like having that set for audio levels. To be fair, there's not actually much else that you can set it for, other than like white balance. That would be the only thing that I can really think that you'd set it as. But it is good that in video mode you can set it to audio level. Okay, so that's all my custom buttons and dials for this camera. Really quickly go through the custom function menu. Most of this I haven't changed. I've only changed a couple of things on this. I don't really open it that much because a lot of these settings I don't change, but it's good to have access to them. And some of them, I have access to them in other ways via custom buttons or dials. Again, it is separated between photo and video, so that's good. So in photo mode, we have drive mode, focus mode, which you can change between autofocus, continuous autofocus, single shot autofocus, manual focus, all that. Generally, don't touch that because I just run it in continuous all the time. If I want a manual focus, I have a switch on the lens. Next one, we have focus area. Again, in photo mode, I have a button for that, but it's there. We have ISO. I have 2 other ways to do this, so I'm probably never going to change ISO through here, but it's there again. Exposure compensation. Again, I have a dial. In manual mode, it's not going to do anything. Metering mode. Never really going to change metering mode, but it's good to have it easily accessible. Silent mode. Again, I have a button for that. Not really that useful. Creative look. I just haven't gotten rid of that. That's just there. I just have that off or on the default one because I don't really want to add anything else to the photos. I would want to do that in post. White balance. Now, like I said, I don't really change white balance much, but it is good to just be easily accessible here in the function menu. Steady shot. Now this is something that I don't really use in photo, but I sometimes do change in video. We have image quality settings. So if, for example, I want to change my JPEG quality, or if I want to change my raw quality from compressed to lossless compressed or uncompressed or whatever, that's all there. And then we have the record media settings. Again, I had that set to a custom button, so that's kind of redundant. For video, we have the audio record level, but I got that dial, so I don't really need it. Some of these are set the same as the photo mode. So the focus mode, the focus area, they're the same. Next one, we have picture profile. Now, I don't really change picture profile much because I just shoot everything in a Cinetone. Then the next one, we have the zebra display, again, which I have a custom button for, so that's not necessary. But then the next one is the zebra level, which isn't really going to be changed much because you just set it to whatever is required by the gamma that you're shooting in, but it is there. It's easy to adjust. We have the peaking display, which is the focus peaking. So I actually currently do have focus peaking turned on. So I'll just have little like sort of white highlights around whatever's in focus. On this camera, it's blue. I can actually see I have little bits on my hair that are blue sort of around my face. So that's just turning that basically on or off. Then we have peaking level, which is turning that up or down. So it's whether it's more or less prominent. White balance, again, same as photo. Steady shot I have set there so I can switch between standard, active, or off, I guess. So certain modes don't allow active steady shot. For example, 100 frames per second. You can't do active steady shot, so you can only do standard. And then the next one we have is the focus mapping, just turning that on off. I haven't really used that much. It is a cool feature. I like the idea of it. I just haven't used it much. And then the last one we have breathing compensation. So if I am doing big focus pulls, particularly with these newer Sony lenses, like pretty much all the G Masters, and then this is very similar to the G Masters, this 20mm 1.8G. They do have pretty pronounced focus breathing, So if you do want to get rid of that, you can just turn on breathing compensation and it'll just crop all of that out. So then you'll have no breathing when you focus. But I leave that off most of the time because I'm never really doing big focus pulls. Usually it'll just be either a static shot like this, or if I'm vlogging, it's nothing is really changing too much between like the depth within the frame, but it's there, easy to access if I need it. And then you have the whole My Menu system, which is just a great way to put more commonly used settings into an easily accessible folder right at the top, and then you can set that to open whenever you press the menu button. It'll open My Menu instead of opening up where you left off. So those are my custom button and dial settings for Sony A7IV. Let me know if any of those surprised you or didn't surprise you. If there are any that you think I should maybe change, I would be interested to hear. But that'll be all for this one. Thank you for watching. Do all the things. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye. I've been recording for 46 minutes. Are you serious? How? I feel like I didn't talk that much. So much to cut out. Hopefully I can make this video under 20 minutes. That's the goal. It's going to be under 20. If this is the clip that makes it over 20, then I'm cutting it right here.